Hey everyone, it's Susan Jones and welcome back to my Sunday Spotlight. This week I am back with another writing workshop tip specifically for grades kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade. Now, if you joined me last week, you will know that I shared 2 of my favorite books to use during those first couple weeks when you're really launching your writing workshop. So if you didn't see that video, at the end of this one, make sure you head over to the thumbnail. It looks like that. Head over and watch that video, and I even share a freebie for you there. Now, also in last week's video, I went ahead and I shared a link in the description because in a couple of weeks, I'm actually getting it all prepared now. I plan to have a little video series and a couple webinars that are all entirely free where I'm going to go a little more into detail about these writing workshop topics and just some different ways that you can effectively teach writing to your K1 and 2 learners. Like I mentioned in last week's video, our kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd graders have an entirely different set of needs than older students do when it comes to writing. It just takes so much for them in terms of their literacy knowledge, their phonemic awareness, their phonics skills, their reading skills. There's just so much for them to learn, for them to then take all of that and apply it to actual writing on the paper. So I have spent the last year or so really diving deep into different research-based writing techniques and tips that you guys can use, and I'm excited to share them with you. So if you are interested in something like that, make sure you go ahead and fill out the little link down below. Now, there were a ton of comments on my last video, and I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I reply to all of them just to make sure that they put their email into that little link. Right now, it's just gonna have you put your name and your email, just so when I'm ready with the videos, I can send them out directly to you. While I have you here, make sure you're subscribed to my channel because every single Sunday I upload a brand new video to my YouTube channel with a tip, a trick, or an idea, a lot of times a freebie, that you can take and use in your classroom right away. Also, make sure you click that bell. That way you're notified of every new week's video. Now let's dive into the writing tip for this week. Now, the tip I'm going to share today might sound pretty obvious, but I want you to go ahead and bear with me while I get into the nitty-gritty of it. Because my tip for you is when you're launching your writing workshop, you really want to slow down and model everything. And I mean everything. So what I've done in the past is I've actually made a little poster that we go through at the beginning of the year, and we walk through and I model exactly what every little part of the writing block is going to look like for your K through 2 learners. It's pretty often that we can rush ourselves because we want to just dive into the writing because, I mean, it's not that surprising. We have an end goal in our mind where we need our students to be writing personal narratives, opinion pieces, and informative pieces that have a lot of detail in them. And sometimes you might be looking at your class and you're like, but I mean, only like a fourth of them can even read. How are we going to get here by the end? And while it may seem like a long time, I really like to spend at least 2 weeks, but more like a month, really getting those procedures in place. Now, when I do that, I usually make an anchor chart with the class and I have a little poster. I'm gonna share this one right here. It is from a blog post a few years ago, and it wasn't the exact anchor chart I used, but it did have everything that I talked about when I said what my writing workshop looks like in my classroom. I actually went ahead and made a printable version of this for you as well, and you can actually go ahead and edit it to make it work for you and your own students. But you can also just grab a piece of anchor chart paper and make this yourself. But the questions you're gonna wanna talk through are as follows. So in this little anchor chart, what I went over is what the writer's workshop looks like. You know, if you've been around and you know a lot of these looks like, sounds like type of lessons that teachers often do, and a lot of times it can work as long as you follow through with it. So in my classroom, we always had the lights off. Again, that was something that was easy for me to do because I had full natural light, and unless it was a super cloudy, rainy day, we could actually turn our overhead lights off to make it more of a peaceful space. I also had music on in the background. I'll go ahead and insert a little image here of the CD that I would love to use. It was from a Kagan workshop that I had taken years ago, but it's classical music and I think it's all 60 beats per minute or beats per second, however that works, beats per minute. Second would be too fast. But it's supposed to be perfect for reading and writing. And I will actually link this in the description as well. I loved having this on in the background. And in my own classroom, my students knew that that was kind of where the sound or the voice level had to be at. so they were allowed to whisper and make noise, but if I couldn't hear the music and if they couldn't hear the music, then they were being too loud. And that's something we practiced over and over, but throughout the rest of the year, they pretty much got it down. If they were being too loud and they were disrupting others, then we would know we had to quiet it down so we could hear the music. Now, during the independent writing part of writing workshop, my students would be sitting at their desks and the teachers would be with students. So I would be walking around, or I would have a small group with me, or I'd have one person back with me at my table. And I had a paraprofessional at the time when I made this one. That's why it says teachers. She would always be working with at least 1 or 2 students during that time as well. Students' voices were mostly off, and then when they were sitting in their seats, I had them have their feet in front of them, they were sitting up straight, and I say that their brains were working. So what that would mean is I explained that if I walked into the classroom, I could look around and see either you're thinking, maybe you're coloring, maybe you're doing something that is attending to your writing. So if you were kind of just, chatting with a friend, then I could tell your brain's not really working on the paper in front of you. And then throughout those first couple weeks, I would also explain what our neatest handwriting looked like and our most colorful illustrations looked like. Now that was just one example from my classroom in 2014. You might have to ask yourself an entirely different set of questions, and it really differs every teacher and every classroom. So some of the things you might want to ask yourself: where are my students going to be sitting during their mini lesson? So when I'm teaching my mini lesson, are they at their seats? Are they on the rug? If they're at the rug, are they sitting in a circle or are they sitting in rows? When it comes time to independent writing, do all students go back to their desks? Is it more free-flowing and they can grab a clipboard and go anywhere that they find comfortable? Where do you want them to go? How will they get their supplies? I always had my students keep all their writing work in a writing folder inside their desks, or they had chair pockets before I had actual desks. And I liked that because I didn't like the idea of them all lining up and trying to gather their supplies. I just found that it wasted a lot of time. So I did have them keep them in their own desks. But again, that's up to you and based on what you have available in your classroom. Ask yourself, what is the teacher going to be doing? And let the students know what they should expect of you and stick to it. If you say that the teacher is going to be with students during this time, then be with students during this time. You might say that the teacher is going to do a little bit of writing at her own desk, so you can model your own writing at your own desk while they're writing before you go meet with students. But whatever you decide, make sure again you stick to it so they know the expectation. And then again, ask yourself what that writing should sound like. Is there going to be music? Is chatter okay? Do you want it completely silent? Up to you, up to your students, but figure it out and make sure that your students know. Now, each of those questions I just asked you to think about, they could each be their own separate lesson during that launching writing workshop time. And again, depending on your grade level, might depend how many of those little things you clump together at one time. If you're a kindergarten teacher, you might have an entire day just spent on, this is where we keep our supplies, right? So your kindergarten students are brand new to school. They might need to know, here is where my writing folder is, here's where the paper is, the pencils, and the crayons. Let's practice grabbing a piece of paper, let's find our pencils, we'll figure out where to go, we'll color a picture, and then let's try putting it all away. Now, if you're a second grade teacher, you can probably clump a few of those together and ask your students, what is writing workshop supposed to look like? Or what is it supposed to sound like? And that's where you can have them, you can teach them exactly where you want them to go, where their supplies are, all in one day, instead of separating it all out. Now, there's just one more thing I want to share about modeling everything, and I also just want to explain, and I go into this deeper in my video series that I'm going to be doing, but I want to just talk about modeled writing as well. Right now, we're still talking about the launching phase, so we're talking about what writing workshop looks like and sounds like, but your students will probably still be writing during this time. And whenever I am teaching any sort of different genre, whether I am teaching personal narratives, writing realistic fiction, informative writing books, opinion, etc., you get it, what I do is I always model making my own piece with the students. Now, I find this to be so important because while I love mentor texts and use them all the time, I want my students to actually see me in the writing process. Here's an example of a writing modeled piece that I did when I was teaching my students how to write reviews back in 2013. So throughout the entire unit, every time I would do a mini lesson and maybe I was explaining how you could open a review or giving reasons for your opinions within your review, every time I would give that mini lesson, I would go ahead and think aloud and add it to my own modeled writing before sending students off back to their seats to do it themselves. I just find this modeled piece to be so important, and it's just so explicit for your own students that they can actually see it in a mentor text, they can see you do it, and then they can go do it themselves and feel just more empowered and more knowledgeable about what they're doing. I find this modeled part to be so important, and actually in the SJT Writing Club this past year, every month when I would come out with new lessons, so each month of the club I would come out with 10 detailed lessons for a different genre of writing, and within each of the units I would actually share my own modeled pieces. Here's some examples, and I would share the way I would think aloud to the students. That way, this piece of paper right here is going directly to the teachers, but that way they can see how I would think aloud and how I would actually model this as I was teaching it. I find that it's super beneficial, and I think that it really helps teachers see what it would be like if they were listening to me actually teach the lesson to students. So heading into this year for Launching Writing Workshop, your job is twofold. Make sure you model everything, and that means in two different ways. Think about what you want your writing workshop to look like and sound like, and think about all the procedures. And then also I want you to think about what your modeled writing is going to look like within each type of genre and show your students exactly how to do it. If you have any questions, please go ahead and leave them down below in the comments. You can also go ahead and grab your free writing workshop poster that you can edit yourself down below in the comments. And don't forget, if you want to know more about the video series or my webinars, make sure you click the link down below as well. See you next Sunday with another writing tip. Bye guys. George.